Well, hey guys, welcome back to the salon. Doing some more animated stuff today. You remember, like, not too long ago when I did a kind of like massively long video? I can't even remember how long it was. It was pretty long. Talking about the 10 best spooky Looney Tunes shorts, like from the classic era. And in that video, I mentioned that I had forgotten a few or been forced to leave a few out because, I was trying to keep it under 10. Well, the time has come to fill in some of the blanks in that last list. So just sit back and relax while I pick out 5 more of the best horror adjacent shorts from Looney Tunes, again, from the kind of classic or golden era from the 1940s, 1950s. So on my last list, I actually featured a short that was called Scaredy Cat, where Porky Pig like buys this kind of creepy old house that's full of murderous mice, and only Porky's cat, Sylvester, who didn't talk in that particular short, is aware of it and keeps like saving Porky, like without Porky being aware of what's going on. I also mentioned that there was another even scarier short along those same lines that I had totally like forgotten about when I was making the first list, and that short is the one we're going to be talking about right now, which is 1954's Claws for Alarm. So at the beginning of this one, Porky is driving with Sylvester. Again, Sylvester is, in this one, has a role as Porky's cat and doesn't talk. Now, they're apparently on a road trip to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because that's where Bugs Bunny is taking a wrong turn all the time, I guess. But because Porky, I guess, is getting sleepy because they've been on the road for a while, he decides he's going to stop for the night in what he thinks is a very quiet country town called Dry Gulch. Now, in reality, as anyone with eyes can fucking see, this place is actually a creepy, like, decrepit ghost town. And obviously, Sylvester sees this immediately, and it makes him, intensely nervous, as it would. So they pull up to this hotel, which, like I said, everything just looks like, there's boards falling off, and it's like clearly nobody is around, like nobody lives there, but Porky is just like completely oblivious. So he just like heads to the entrance of this hotel, completely clueless as to like, there being nobody there. So even like these little sinister eyes are like peeking out at them from like cracks in the walls, and like Sylvester is like freaking out about it, like kind of like, keeping very close to Porky while they're like moving along. And then he sees what appears to be like the shadow of this gigantic spider like inching along the outer wall. Like he kind of just sees it like that. And he jumps into Porky's suitcase and like hides inside one of Porky's shirts that he's got folded up in there. But Porky is like, what the hell? Like, what, why are you like freaking out so much? And so when he turns around, he sees that obviously it was just like this tiny, tiny spider that was like crawling along a thing, and like the shadow just made it look really big. So, obviously he just keeps scoffing at Sylvester for being such a coward. So again, for some reason, like Porky is not even fazed that there's nobody at the front desk, and he very cavalierly like signs the register book, and he's like, "Oh, well, I guess we'll just find our own room." I'm like, "Yeah, that's how hotels work, Porky. You just go right." It's like, how is he gonna pay? I don't know. Like nowadays, you have to give like a credit card, you know what I mean? But it's like back then, I didn't guess you didn't have to because this was 1954. So meanwhile, while Porky is doing that, like signing the register book or whatever, like Sylvester starts looking on in horror because this noose like starts descending toward Porky from inside the mouth of this mounted moose head that's like over the desk. And you find out they don't show them as much in this one, because I feel like in the Scaredy Cat short they actually showed the mice like with the little execution kind of parade that they had and everything. They show them in this one, but kind of more like in shadow. They're not as much characters. Like, that it's mice doing it, but you don't see them as much, which I think makes it like a little bit creepier. So these are essentially like the same killer mice that were in Scaredy Cat and are just like trying to kill both of them. So Sylvester, because this noose is coming down like out of the moose mouth, and of course Porky doesn't see it, so like Sylvester like bodily like, shoves Porky over the desk like to save him, but even at, you know, obviously Porky is like all indignant and everything like that. But then like Sylvester's trying to like mime like what was going on. Like, because like I said, Sylvester can't talk in these shorts, because that would be weird if like your pet could talk, I guess. But well, I guess other than like a talking bird. So that's, you know, I don't know. I'm just going off on a tangent. But so so Porky basically just thinks he doesn't know what he's doing. Like he's making like a moose face and like doing a rope out through his mouth. But like Porky thinks, I guess, like that Sylvester was just like kicking his ass for no reason, and just kind of like sputters at him like, what the fuck? So then as they're going up the stairs to where the rooms are, this rifle barrel like comes out of the same moose's mouth, because this is, you know, this moose head's like pretty multi-purpose, I guess, and it aims at Porky's like retreating back, like he's going up the stairs. So Sylvester like leaps onto the moose head and like sort of tangles with it, so there's like this big fight, and this actually causes the rifle to go off, which like narrowly misses like shooting Porky, right? So the pig is just like beside himself at this point. And I always laugh. One of the things that makes me laugh the most about this is just this utterly contemptuous tone that he has as he says something to Sylvester like, aren't you ashamed fighting with stuffed animals? Like the way that he talks, like the tone of it just like cracks me up. Every single time I watch this cartoon, that makes me laugh. So in the cartoon, like the night goes on pretty much like this, like with the mice attempting to like variously hang or shoot or behead Porky with a knife. Like one time one of the mice has this big knife and he kind of like swings down and tries to take his head off. Every time Sylvester gets blamed, like, what are you doing with that rope? You know what I mean? And that razor. So it's that kind of thing. Until finally, again, like Porky chucks him out the room and like makes him sleep out in the hallway. Now in the hallway, like, you know, Sylvester is like freaking out and he's like all up in the corner and everything. And he's just like petrified with fear at the sight of this ghost making its way down the hall. And I absolutely love, there's like this really weird, like seasick kind of music that accompanies the ghost, which I always really liked. And as soon as I watched the cartoon again, like yesterday, I was like, oh my God, I remember that music like really, really well. Like obviously he thinks it's a real ghost, but then like it passes in front of a window and like the moonlight shines through it and you can see that it's like a whole bunch of mice like standing one on top of the other with like a sheet over them or whatever. So because Sylvester is like so terrified of this ghost, he runs back in the room and Porky is finally like, just fine, you know, you can sleep in the bed. But because the killer mice are so relentless, like Sylvester kind of like feels the need to appropriate the rifle and kind of stand guard over Porky all night to make sure nothing bad happens to him. So the next morning, Porky wakes up and he's all refreshed and he's like, wow, this is the nicest place. It's so quiet. And he's like, let's stay a week or 10 days or something like that because it's so restful here. And at which point, Sylvester, who looks like me before I've had my coffee in the morning, like he has like these horribly big, like bloodshot eyes, like big bags and stuff. At this point, I mean, Sylvester just straight up like bashes him in the head with a rifle butt. Like it happens off screen, but it's like he goes over there with the rifle butt like that, and then you hear a whack. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, he fucking knocks him out pretty much cold, and then he just like throws him in the car and peels off. You know, because Sylvester can't talk doesn't mean he can't drive, because a cat can drive a car in this short. At the end of the short, though, we actually see the little sinister eyes like we saw in the cracks at the beginning appearing behind the car's instrument panel. So it's kind of like implying that the killer mice are going along for the ride. Now, as I said, there was a third cartoon in this series too called Jumpin' Jupiter. I was going to include that one on the list too, but it's like I said, I didn't have enough room and it was like harder to get hold of. This one is actually on HBO Max. Almost all of these were. I think one of them I had to watch on Daily Motion, but other than that, all of these are on HBO Max. Now, as you can imagine, Cause for Alarm, you know, given its subject matter, it's had its fair share of run-ins with the censors. So prior to 2002, most networks that aired it, like if ever it was on like Nickelodeon or anything like that, would take out, there was a scene where Sylvester like sticks his finger into the rifle barrel, like when it comes out a hole in the wall, or it comes out, yeah, I think it comes out the hole in the wall, and he sticks his finger through there, and then like the bullet goes all the way through his body and like comes out his tail. So they take that scene out. The part where Sylvester is like miming like the noose like coming out of the moose head, like where he like makes a moose head and he like drops the noose down through his mouth, they take that out. And they also take out the scene with the rifle barrel like coming out of the moose head and like aiming at Porky, and then like Sylvester jumping on the moose head and like fighting and the gun going off. They take that out. And they also take out the scene in the bedroom where Sylvester like cuts, like where the mice like lower the noose like onto Porky's neck, and then Sylvester comes with the straight razor and like cuts the rope, like trying to save him. But then obviously when Porky wakes up, he's like holding the rope and like the straight razor, so it looks bad, you know what I mean? So they take that out, and Porky doesn't, he doesn't say like, hey, are you trying to murder me? But like what he says kind of like implies that. So I guess they took a lot of that out, which, like I said, the short is only like 7 minutes long. So I can't imagine like how much shorter it would be with like those little scenes removed. But, you know, if you watch on HBO Max now, I think if you watch it anywhere, it's completely intact. It's not cut. That was, like I said, that was prior to 2002. They took all those scenes out. But far as I know, like, you see it in its entirety pretty much everywhere. So this one is another Porky feature. Actually, Porky's in these a lot, in these 5. So this one actually involves another devious mouse and a kind of serial killer who either looks like or is actually portrayed by the Big Bad Wolf. You know, like the character that was the Big Bad Wolf, like in the Three Little Pigs Looney Tunes short that they did. It looked like the same character. So this short, Bye Bluebeard, actually first aired in 1949. So at the beginning, this part always cracks me up. So Porky is supposedly doing a workout routine because you hear like this announcer on the radio who's like up, down, up, you know, he's doing like an exercise kind of thing, like Jane Fonda or some shit. But then like as we pan over, we see that Porky isn't actually exercising along with the guy on the radio. He's actually scooping his food into his mouth. Like in time with the announcers, like up, down, you know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, incidentally, that is also my favorite way to exercise. So I feel you on that, Porky. So prior to the events of the cartoon, Porky has apparently been having trouble with this mouse who lives in his house with him. And on this particular day, the mouse very sneakily, like while Porky is sitting there stuffing his face, puts Porky's finger on a slice of bread and then slathers the finger with mustard and then slaps another slice on top of that and then fools Porky into like biting into his own hand sandwich. It's a ham hand sandwich. That's what it is. So in retaliation, Porky actually hammers just like a ridiculous amount of like boards and locks and shit like all over the mouse hole to keep the unsanitary little rodent, that's what he says, like from coming out the hole. After he does that though, Porky then hears a special bulletin on the radio, like where the exercise program was, that a murderer named Bluebeard is on the loose, like in the area, and like look out for him. So Porky is like terrified at this, and he just piles all the remaining shit in his house, like chairs and furniture and fucking bank vault doors and shit like that, like up against the front door, closes all the windows, pulls down on the blinds, and he's like, phew, you know, now I'm safe or whatever. So the mouse, meanwhile, kind of smells an opportunity in this. And it just so happens that the mouse inside his mouse hole somewhere has a Bluebeard getup like stashed away in there someplace. So he comes out like with a very evil laugh, and he has like a big black hat and like a little black robe and like a blue beard, you know what I mean? So he comes out, and this like scares, you know, Porky right out of his body momentarily. Like he's like, phew, like he flies out, which I think is funny. Because Porky, even though he's like talking about how smart he is and everything like that, he's apparently too dim to realize that this tiny Bluebeard is actually just the same mouse that he was just fucking with, just with a disguise on. So to placate this Bluebeard, this killer, Porky actually gives the mouse like all the food he wants because he's like, hey, please don't kill me, Mr. Bluebeard, type of thing. Now this goes on for a couple minutes until the radio broadcast actually clarifies that the actual Bluebeard is 6'11" and weighs 350 pounds. Now the hilarious thing about this is that Porky actually has to get out the ruler to confirm that the mouse that he thought was Bluebeard is considerably less than 6'11". In fact, specifically, he's only 3 inches tall. But it just cracks me up that he felt like the need to. It's like, obviously, he's not 6'11". He's like this big. But it's like the fact that he had to get out the ruler and check. That's another thing that like makes me laugh. Like shit like that, just the absurdity of that like always makes me laugh in these. It's just like, that's always funny to me. I don't know why. So Porky, gotta say, gets real smug about finally catching on to the mouse's game, even though, duh, it should have been obvious from the beginning, but okay. So he starts like chasing the mouse around. But in the course of doing that, like he actually pulls the real Bluebeard out from under the table where Bluebeard has been hiding. I don't know how he got in there. It's like, it's a cartoon. I'm not worried about it. So Porky actually like goes out of body with fear again. I think his whole like soul comes out this time. I think before it was just kind of like just popped the top of his head off or something. But he comes like all the way out. And at that point, Bluebeard straps Porky to a rocket that he's gonna like blast out the window. And then Bluebeard like sits down at the table where all the big feast is, and he just sits down to eat, because all anybody wants to do in this short is like stuff their faces, which, you know, I can relate to that, like I said. So the mouse, probably unwisely, actually fucks with the real Bluebeard, like, while Bluebeard's trying to eat. And then there's kind of like a hilarious, this is another thing that really made me laugh. There's another, like, really hilarious, like, repeating gag where the mouse keeps hiding, like, in various receptacles, like, on the table, like, you know, like a water pitcher, like a vase or something like that, or like a coffee pot. And then when Bluebeard, like, peeks inside, being like, where'd that damn mouse go? He gets hit in the face with a pie that just happened to be inside. And that happens like 5 times. And it's like, even though most of the objects that the mouse is hiding in are obviously too small to have a whole entire pie in there, even taking it for granted that there would be a pie at the bottom of like a coffee pot or a flower vase or something like that to begin with. I mean, so like I said, just the absurdity of stuff like that, when it just kept happening. And then like at the last one, there was like a gap, like you weren't really sure. And then like bam, it comes out, and it's just like, I don't know why, that just gets me every time. So while all the pie stuff is going on, Porky has actually managed to extinguish the fuse on the rocket that was supposed to be blasting him out the window. So Bluebeard decides on another very convoluted way to kill Porky. So we actually, at this point, we see things from like the mouse's perspective, because he's run back inside his mouse hole, and we actually hear Porky screaming in agony as though Bluebeard is like, you know, chopping him into ham steaks or something like that, like out in the main part of the house. But then we see that Porky is actually just tied to a chair while Bluebeard is building a guillotine, like, to behead Porky with. I mean, labor intensive, sure. But, you know, I guess Bluebeard, like, takes pride in his craftsmanship, and he always goes that extra mile. He could just chop your head off with a knife or stab you or shoot you or something like that. But no, he's gonna, like, actually, like I said, he's gonna go the extra mile on this. He's gonna, like, you just wait right there. I'm gonna build a guillotine, and then we'll do this shit upright. You know what I mean? It's like that. So just as Porky is about to have his head sliced clean off, the mouse, actually in a fit of conscience, decides that he's going to help Porky. He's going to intervene. So he actually lures Bluebeard away by ringing a dinner bell, and then he serves Bluebeard like a pile of lit bombs, like underneath, you know, like a cloche or a tray or whatever. And Bluebeard's like, popovers, because obviously popovers look just like lit little round bombs from a cartoon. So Bluebeard like gobbles them all down, has some immediate digestive distress, let's call it that. So he rushes into the bathroom, like to the medicine cabinet, and he like takes all of the medicines out and just makes this concoction out of just like everything that's in there, like every random shit, all the random shit. And then he guzzles it all down, and then Bluebeard literally explodes. He just explodes. So later on, like after this happens, after they've presumably like cleaned bits of Bluebeard off the wall of the inside of the house, I don't know. So Porky is actually like shoving food in his mouth again, like celebrating the fact that he's still alive. But this time we can see that he set up this little fancy dining table, like piled high with food for the mouse as well, because he appreciates that the mouse, you know, saved his bacon, I guess. Not surprisingly, again, the censors originally took issue with this short as well. So they usually would take out, like I said, I think generally like prior to 2002, they would take out the scene of Porky like on the guillotine. They don't show him getting his head cut off, obviously, but they show him with his head in the guillotine, you know what I mean? They also take out the bit where Bluebeard mixes together all the medicines, like from the bathroom, like into this big drug cocktail smoothie thing, and, you know, quaffs it all down, because obviously they didn't want little kids go and be like, hey, that looks like a neat idea. I'm going to go pour all the random shit in the medicine cabinet into a shake, and I'm going to drink it. So, yeah, that's why they didn't do it. Strangely, though, censors really didn't seem to have a problem with Bluebeard actually being blown to smithereens like a second later, but, you know, whatever. So, again, like I said, the version that I watched on HBO Max, all of that stuff is still in there, and as far as I know, wherever you see it nowadays, you know, they've put all the cut stuff back in. So this one, I was doing like a lot of research on the internet about like what Looney Tunes from this time period really kind of like stuck with people as being maybe not like scary, but having like kind of horrific ideas or like horror adjacent ideas. And this is one that kept coming up a lot. Like I said, it's not overtly scary. There's no monsters or anything like that. But just like, it's one of those ones where just like the idea of it is kind of fucked up. So this one's called Life with Feathers, and it originally aired in 1951. And I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the first short to feature a talking Sylvester. Like I said, Sylvester had been in shorts prior to this, but he didn't talk. I think this is the first one where he was an actual character and he talked. Yeah, so like I said, the whole concept behind this one's pretty fucked up. So what you got like a little blue lovebird. And he gets thrown out of his bird cage by his wife, who's, I mean, it seems like a domestic abuse situation because, like, the wife is like throwing all the crockery in the place at him, and it's like breaking all around him as he leaves very, very mournfully. So at this point, like, he actually breaks the fourth wall and explains to the audience that because he's a lovebird, he can't actually live without love. So he's decided that he's gonna off himself. So, you know. In a bit that was censored for some airings, but has been put back in there since then, he actually is walking along really sad, and he pictures himself like they show like little thought bubbles with like a little, it looks like little chalk drawings, like his thoughts, you know what I mean? He pictures himself like essentially like blowing his own head off with a pistol, so there's that, jumping off a tall building, laying his head on the train tracks, like with the train coming. So he kind of like dismisses all these scenarios, like, no, I don't really want to kill myself that way. But then he comes up with the idea to get himself eaten by a cat, because that's obviously so much better. I was thinking maybe he was one of those vor fetishists that I've heard so much about, you know what I mean? Because it's like, why? That seems like a really shitty way to go, is all I'm saying. Not even getting into the fact that, like, he's a bird, so, like, jumping off a building wouldn't necessarily, because he can fly. I mean, unless he specifically didn't fly, but like I said, I think about this kind of stuff too much, obviously. So now that the lovebird has decided, like, how he wants to kill himself, he sees Sylvester very happily, like, picking food out of a row of garbage cans, like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet or something. But then when he sees, like, the bird actually, like, whistles, like, to get his attention or something. And he's, like, and Sylvester's like, ooh, super jazzed, because he's like, oh, this is better than, like, picking food out of the garbage. It's like a fresh kill, you know what I mean? It only really takes him a moment, though, to realize that the bird actually wants to be eaten. At which point, Sylvester, who is no dummy, becomes suspicious because he's like, maybe this bird is like poison. Like somebody's trying to poison me, or he's trying to poison me, or something. There's something the matter with him. And so therefore, I don't want to eat him because I might die. So the bird, though, is like bound and determined to be eaten by Sylvester. And Sylvester is just as adamant that if he eats the bird, he'll die because he thinks he's poisoned. So the whole short becomes kind of like this war of attrition where the bird like continually keeps trying to come up with ways to essentially like insert himself into the cat's mouth and like get him to chew and swallow. And the cat has to try to like keep him out. Like all the while getting angrier and hungrier because every time he tries to eat something else, like the lovebird tries to get into his mouth. So he's like not being able to eat anything because this bird is like right there trying to get in his face, you know? I mean, there are a lot of really great gags in this, like Sylvester kind of like puffing a pipe, like to smoke the bird out of his mouth. The bird actually kind of inexplicably like dresses up like Santa Claus. At some point, it comes down the chimney. It's obviously Santa Claus. He's like this big, like I said, with a little Santa suit on. And so he does that, like trying to fly into his mouth. And the bird purposely trying to get Sylvester so hungry that he'll eat him whether he wants to or not. You know what I mean? Like he puts on the radio like all these cooking shows and all that other kind of stuff. I also, one of my favorite things about this is like Sylvester's very sarcastic grumbling about someone trying to poison him, like while he's opening this big giant can of cat food and like kind of preparing to chow down on it. It's just like, I don't know, just like the way that he's like talking to somebody trying to poison me, goddamn, you know what I mean? It's like that kind of shit. And that like really made me laugh. So at the end of the short though, there's kind of like a little bit of an ironic twist. The lovebird actually gets a telegram from his pissed off wife saying that she changed her mind and that presumably like she wants him back. So the formerly suicidal bird now has kind of like a new lease on life. Oh, yay, like I got love back, so I don't need to get eaten. At this point, though, Sylvester is so emaciated that he's going to eat the lovebird no matter what. So he basically like chases him over the balcony. But the bird like gets away. But once he gets back to his cage, the wife has changed her mind again and like back to being pissed at him and starts throwing dishes at him again. So then the lovebird like leaves again, calling for Sylvester to come and eat him again. I mean, the whole thing is like pretty messed up. Like I said, that's kind of a pretty messed up when you really think about the kind of the whole idea behind that is like pretty fucked up, I thought. So I think that's why that's one that comes up on like a lot of people's lists. I don't think it's on because there's a DVD or a Blu-ray or something like that that's like a collection of Looney Tunes cartoons. I think it's called Looney Tunes After Dark. And it's 2 volumes, and it has most of the ones that you think about, like when you think about the scary ones. Like some of the ones I talked about last time, like Transylvania 65000 and all that kind of stuff. And the ones with Gossamer and the ones with Witch Hazel and all that. But this one wasn't on there, but just because, like I said, it's not overtly scary. It's not monsters or anything like that. But there's just something about the concept behind it of like this suicidal little bird who's like trying to get eaten by a cat, which is like kind of a fucked up thing when you really think about it. So this short, this is one that I always really, really liked, and I can't believe I forgot it. Like when I was talking about, I think I thought about it when I was doing the first top 10, but maybe it just got like pushed off or something like that, because I couldn't remember if it was actually as creepy as I remembered until I rewatched it. This one is on HBO Max as well. Life with Feathers, I forgot to mention, is, as far as I know, is not on HBO Max. They have a lot of Looney Tunes on there, like from the earliest times to like modern times, but there's a couple just here and there that are not on there. Like they did have the season that Life with Feathers was from, but they didn't have that particular episode. I don't know why. So like I said, I found it on Daily Motion and I watched it on there, but I think all the other ones are on there though. And this one is on there. This is The Wearing of the Grin. And this is another one where Porky kind of gets himself into like some dangerous shenanigans due to being completely clueless to context clues, I guess, and thinking everything is just nonsense and nothing bad's gonna happen. So in this particular short, the Porky is on a business trip to Ireland, and he's on his way to Dublin. But he gets caught in a storm, and, he's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So he decides he's going to seek shelter in this very creepy, like, isolated castle that has a sign out front, like, warning passersby, beware the leprechauns. So, of course, Porky, who's very, skeptical, he doesn't truck with any of that blarney. So he steps right up to the castle and, like, kind of bangs on this big, enormous front door that actually has a cool, like, shamrock-shaped knocker on it. So nobody answers. So Porky just, like I said, it was just like in the clause for alarm where he was just like, oh, well, clearly nobody's here at this hotel, so I'm just going to sign the register and find my own fucking room. I'm like, that's pretty ballsy, pig. All right. So nobody answers, and he's like, oh, well, everybody inside must be asleep, so I'm just going to let myself in. So he does. Now, at this point, he's confronted by a kind of sinister looking, this actually was like as creepy as I remembered, because I remember this being creepy, but I hadn't seen it in a long time. It is pretty creepy. So there's kind of like this very sinister shadow of a man, like with kind of a derby and a pipe, a classic kind of leprechaun looking guy, but it's like a shadow. So the guy kind of steps out, and has all in green, and he's, with the red beard and all that kind of stuff. So he introduces himself with the most Irish name possible, Seamus O'Toole. And he tells Porky that he's the caretaker of the castle, but he says nobody's lived here for years and years except for the leprechauns. Porky's just like, leprechauns, what the fuck ever. You know what I mean? So Seamus is like, well, there's nobody here, but it's like, if you need some place to stay, I'll find you a bed or whatever. But then, wouldn't you know it, a conveniently placed mace over the doorway, not like mace like you spray, but like one of the big medieval weapons with the spiked ball on the end. It's kind of over the doorway, and it falls, and it bonks Porky in the head and like knocks him out. So from that point on, it's revealed that Seamus O'Toole, the caretaker of this castle, is actually 2 leprechauns, O'Pat and O'Mike. which like I had forgotten that was their names, but that made me laugh too. So it's two leprechauns, essentially like one standing on the other one's shoulders. So they're masquerading as one full-size man. Like one's kind of like the pants, like he's down in the pants. That must be like the shit. I hope they switch out. I don't think they do though, because it feels like the redheaded one is always like at the top, so the other one just must be crammed down in the pants all the time, like underneath the other leprechaun's crotch constantly. I'm sure it doesn't smell great. So yeah. Now, so when Porky like supposedly wakes up and sees this disembodied lower half of Seamus, because like the top leprechaun like kind of jumps out and he's like going to do some shit, and he just leaves these pants like standing there. So Porky just sees these pants standing there like walking by themselves, and he kind of like freaks the fuck out, and he jumps into his bed. And it kind of causes the bed to sort of go up in the wall, and it throws him like down this spiraling shaft or whatever. And so he ends up falling into this kind of sparse looking, just chamber that looks kind of like a courtroom. And so Pat and Mike, the leprechauns, they're actually afraid that Porky is come there to like steal their pot of gold, right? Because they're leprechauns. So they proclaim him guilty without letting him even say anything, obviously. And they sentence him to wear the green shoes. Now, at first, like, they just put the shoes on him, and Porky's like, oh, these are kind of nice. Like, these are the nicest shoes I've ever owned. But then, like, when he stands up, the shoes actually make him dance, like, crazily. And then there's like this kind of weird sequence where it's like really surreal. And so the shoes are like making him dance through this like really weird, like very unsettling landscape where he sees, the leprechauns' faces like really big, like guffawing at him. And there's like a big giant pot of gold that's like boiling, and he falls into it like it's lava and all this other. It's pretty freaky, like, to be honest with you. So after he falls into the molten gold, like in the giant pot, he wakes up and he's back by the front door again, like with Seamus splashing water on him, like to wake him up from the mace falling and like hitting him on the head. So we're meant to think that this was all a dream. But as Porky's just like, yeah, I think I'll go stay somewhere else or whatever, and he just skedaddles out of the castle, Seamus turns out to be really two leprechauns after all. Like, a hand comes out the pants and like they shake hands like, hey, we did it, you know what I mean? So yeah, like I said, this one always like kind of freaked me out for some reason. I hadn't seen it in a long time, but when somebody mentioned the name of it, or when I saw it, the title of it come up on the Looney Tunes After Dark, like they said what shorts were on there, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that one. And I said I remember that being like pretty creepy, but like I said, I couldn't remember like if it was as creepy as I remembered it being when I was a kid, and it absolutely is. So I mean, leprechauns are not inherently scary. I mean, no matter what that damn horror movie franchise wants you to believe, there is actually like a real kind of like nightmarish vibe to this one that's sort of like, you would, like I said, you wouldn't think, you would just think it was just this kind of funny, oh, leprechauns, it's like a little Irish whatever, but it's actually like way like more unsettling than you would think. It actually kind of gave me the same feeling as the Heffalumps and Woozles like thing from Winnie the Pooh. It's Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, I think that was, where it's just kind of like, it's not overtly scary, but it's just kind of like weird and eerie and like disturbing a little bit, and especially when the rest of the stuff around it is like so innocuous. And the thing about it is that, but despite how creepy this one is, it didn't really run into any censorship roadblocks that I could see, unlike pretty much all of the other cartoons that I discussed in the series. But yeah, if you haven't seen this one's on HBO Max as well. So this one is very much horror adjacent, even though you might not think that, like from the title of it and from the subject matter. So I think I mentioned this one briefly, like in part one of this, when I did part one of this video series, when I was talking about the kind of similarly themed hide and go tweet short. Unlike that one, which was Sylvester and Tweety, this one is actually Bugs Bunny against a Jekyll and Hyde type character. So this short actually first aired in 1955. So Bugs lives in his rabbit hole, like in the park, and every day this mild-mannered little man like comes to the park and gives him carrots, while Bugs kind of like pretends to be this meek, regular little bunny rabbit. It's like some weird role play shit they have going on. I mean, they don't show any of that, but they just like imply that that's what's been going on. On this particular day, though, Bugs decides he's just going to cut to the chase and be his real self, and he's just going to like ask the man to adopt him so he can, live in a warm house and have all the carrots he wants all the time, like instead of having to do this whole rigmarole pretending to be like this cute little bunny or whatever. So the little man actually seems delighted by this idea. So he carries Bugs back to his home/office, which very ominously has a little shingle hanging out on the outside, advertising the medical services of Dr. Jekyll. Yeah, you guessed it. So while Bugs gets kind of settled into the house, Dr. Jekyll goes to scare up some carrots for Bugs Bunny, but is kind of tempted by this red Fanta looking like Hyde juice, which is like sitting in his laboratory just right there on the table. He tries to resist it as he's walking past, but I guess kind of like a drunk, you're walking by and you see that like bottle of J&B right there. You just can't say no, you know what I mean? So he just like walks by and he like chugs some of the Hyde juice down. Now, as expected, he turns into this big hulking green monster with bugged out red eyes, who immediately starts going on the prowl like throughout the house. So the monster actually comes up behind Bugs, who has been very skillfully actually playing Chopin's Minute Waltz, you know what I mean, which he actually pronounces Minute Waltz by Chopin. That's what he says, because the sheet music is there. So he's been playing it on the piano. So there's a great scene too where like the monster like comes up behind him and Bugs doesn't even turn around. He's just at the piano and he starts like kind of like flipping out and like doing like the face and everything like that, like because he just like senses the danger. He doesn't even have to look around. So and he starts playing the piano like all discordant. It's really funny. So the monster then tries to kill Bugs with an axe, but Bugs manages to run away, yelling for the doctor because he thinks the monster is a patient who obviously really, really needs some medical attention because he doesn't really look all that good. So much like Hide and Go Tweet, which I talked about in the last, when I talked about the top 10, the bulk of this cartoon's runtime, which is 7 minutes, kind of has Bugs Bunny like trying to rescue Dr. Jekyll and himself from the monster, not realizing that Dr. Jekyll is the monster, you know what I mean? Because Dr. Jekyll keeps turning back and forth, much like Tweety did in Hide and Go Tweet, where he was like normal Tweety and then he was like monster Tweety, you know what I mean? So I mean, at one point, like Bugs gives a convenient rifle to Dr. Jekyll for protection, but then ends up getting shot at himself when the doctor kind of like monsters out. So finally, like Bugs has had enough and says he's getting the hell out of here. But then the doctor doesn't want him to leave because he really liked having him around. He liked having a pet bunny. So he said, I'll pour the rest of the Hyde formula down the drain. Like, you won't see that monster anymore. But then he notices that the beaker that had the Hyde formula in it is empty, and he asks Bugs if he drank it. So, like, Bugs gets extremely, extremely offended at this accusation, and he just kind of, like, stalks out of the house in a huff, like, going back to his hole in the park where his integrity won't be questioned or something. He says something like that. So on the way back to the hole, though, you realize, yes, he actually did drink the Hyde juice because he turns like all green and monstrous. And all of the other elderly folks that are like there in the park, like feeding the pigeons or whatever, they just start screaming and like flee from him in terror, even though Bugs doesn't really seem to realize why. Like, he doesn't seem to realize that he monstered out. Like, he's just like, what, you think they never saw a rabbit before or something like that. Now, as I said in my other video, I think, the Mr. Hyde in this short isn't quite as terrifying as Monster Tweety from, like, Hide and Go Tweet, but he's still, like, pretty frightening, and he's pretty, like, murdery. Like, I actually really like the design of the character. This is another one that didn't have any trouble with the censors, even though, at one point, like, Mr. Hyde does actually swing at Bugs's head with an axe and shoots at him like directly with a rifle, like from inches away, but for some reason they left that in there. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed listening to me talk about these Looney Tunes classics as much as I enjoyed rewatching them and talking about them to you guys. Though I do think that I covered most of the golden era spooky cartoons, other than, like I said, the Marvin Martian ones, although I was thinking about doing the Marvin Martian ones, but they're not, like, scary to me. That's not, like, really horror-themed, you know what I mean? Maybe I should do, like, maybe sci-fi, because then I can do, like, Duck Dodgers and all that kind of stuff, too. But I realized that there are a smattering of other horror themed Looney Tunes cartoons that came out like during the 80s and 90s. I think there was one called Night of the Living Duck, and some of those were like a little bit scarier because they could get away with a lot more, I guess. So I don't know, if you guys are interested, I might eventually get around to doing some of the, well, they're not new, they're still like really old, but they're newer in the sense that they're not from the era like that I saw when I was growing up, because I was already an adult, by the time the late 80s and the 90s came around. So I didn't see those like as a kid, like on Saturday morning or anything like that. But I've heard that there are a lot more horror adjacent ones that came out in the 80s and 90s. So I'd be interested to cover those as well. And if you guys are interested, I might get around to it one of these days. So as I said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this little journey coming with me talking about some spooky animated stuff. And that'll do it for this installment. Please like and share if you enjoy the content, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.